That's sad. But it's okay. It's going to be recorded anyway. Okay, so this is my circle. I think this is where we stopped last time, so this is fine. So our circular flow diagram is actually a visualization of the interrelationship between these four participants, four elements in our economy, two markets and two participants. From the very early on, surprisingly, this circular flow diagram is entirely color coded. The relationship that we are going to look at are coded by using different colors. The arrows indicate the kind of relationship that exists between these different components. And what we're going to see that in an economy, there are basically two kinds of activities that take place. And let's try to understand that. In an economy, everything passes through the market, right? Including taking a nap to giving a class lecture, everything is a market activity. If we believe that, we also have to believe that our households and our firms also, work through these markets, these two kinds of markets. So if we believe that everything is a market activity, we should notice that all these market activities can be broadly divided into two kinds. First, there are this physical movement of stuff, right? Raw materials being sold by household to the firms, raw materials being getting inside the production process, producing a product. That product is going to the product market where the household is buying the product. So there are movement of physical things that you can see. Are we all clear on that? Now behind the movement of these physical things, there are also movement of financial resources. Because whenever these physical stuff are moving from one side of the market to another side, a payment has to be made. Because without that payment, you really cannot buy or sell anything in any market. Are we all clear on that? The nature of these financial transactions are very critical. So, two kinds of activities. We are going to first look at the physical activities. So this is the inner loop, the inner circular flow diagram. They are obviously color coded, so let's look at them. The first, so discussion will start with the factor market because that's always the most important one. So the factor market is where the household is supplying. So he is supplying, and he is supplying, land. He is supplying labor. He is supplying capital, right? So he is supplying those to our firm, who is buying those from the factor market. So in this case, our household is the seller, our firm is the buyer, right? Do we all see that? So stuff is starting from our household, ending up in our firm. That's factor market, end. Our firm is buying those factors of production, land, labor, and capital, putting that in the production process, and then they are producing goods which they are going to supply to the factor market, to the product market. So in the product market, our firm is the supplier, and they are supplying final goods or products which our household is buying. Right? So notice that in this case, in this product market, our firm is the supplier, our household is the buyer. In the factor market, our household is the seller and our firm is the buyer. Their role is completely, sort of interchanging depending on what kind of market you are in. That's the inner flow of goods and services from one market to another market, from one participant to another participant. That's a circular flow. Are we all clear on that? Now this circular flow of physical goods and services and raw materials has to be backed up by financial resources. Because without those, these cannot be conducted. So what do we mean by that? By that, I mean that whenever our firm is, whenever our household is selling those factors of production to our firm, in the factor market, our household needs to get something in return. What our household gets are wages and other forms of payment. Wages is probably the most important payment that a household receives. So wages are the payment for the labor that household supplies to the firm. There are also some other payments that our household will receive. They are called interest rates, which is not here because it's mainly a macro concept. Interest rate is the payment for the capital that household rents to our firm. And also the natural resources has to be sold. There is a name for that as well. We call it pure rent. Pure rent will be the payment for the natural resources that firms buy from the household. And interest rate is the payment of the capital that our firm is buying from the household. So in summary, a household receives three payments: wages, rent, and pure rent. In the slide, only wages are being discussed, but they are sufficient. So notice that in this buying and selling process, our firm is paying those payments which is being received by the household, and those payments become the income of the household. So the wage, the rent, the pure rent, whatever payment our household gets become the income of the household. So that's one part of the outer flow of financial resources that is connecting our household and our firm. Our household gets their income from the firms. Are we all clear on that? The next set of financial resources are going to come. This is the problem. When I skip slides, stuff goes away. But that's fine. We're going to draw it again. So there is another flow of financial resources. And that flow is now coming from our firms. I apologize. It's coming from our households. I think this is sufficient. This is okay. So our household is the buyer. Oh man. Okay. So our household is the buyer of goods and services from the product market. When our household buys things from the product market, they pay price for those products, right? So those products that households buy and the price they pay become what we call spending in our economy. So I want to take that out. We and highlight that this is the spending for the households. What does it mean for our firm? Anyone? What does a firm receive from this product market? Revenue. Very good. Okay. Remember, this is where the income is of the household is coming from, right? Right? So income of the household comes from the factor market. Spending of the household goes to the firm as revenue in the product market. What can we call these payments that our firm makes to the household? Wage, rent, and natural rent, or pure rent. What do you call them? Very good. We're going to change that word a little bit, right? Expenses is not an economic word, to our surprise, right? Macroeconomics sometimes talk about expenses, right? But the more formal word is cost of production or factor payments. I like the word cost of production. Why? Because these are actually what it costs for a firm to produce. Please make sure you write down these 4 very critical terms that I have written down. Let's now summarize the model and then talk about these four terms. We started with our factor market, where we said that our firm's household sells all these factors, and as a result, our household gets income in the form of wages, rent, and pure rent. Household takes that income, use that income to buy goods from the product market, which becomes the spending of the household. Firm sells those goods in the product market and get what they call revenue. And firm use that revenue to buy those factors of production, so it becomes the cost of the firm. The critical question, which we are going to answer very, very specifically in 3 chapters from now, is that how is the income and the spending of the household is connected, and what is the relationship between the revenue of the firm and the cost of the firm. Let's start with the first question. The first question is actually a macro question. And I see some of you have taken macroeconomics. What do you think is the relationship between income of the household and the spending of the household? Obviously, they are related, right? You cannot spend what you don't have, right? Your income really dictates how much can you spend. Do the households spend all their money? They don't, right? What else do you do with your income? Okay, right? The reason why I'm asking this question is because we are now going to look at the 2 limitations of our circular flow diagram by pointing out that our circular flow diagram is not complete. It is missing 2 critical elements of our actual economy. Okay, the first one is the fact that our household really do not spend all their money or all their income. They actually save a part of their income. In order to express, and so saving is kind of important, right? In order to express saving, we need to find a market where that saving is channeled. So in your macroeconomics, you will be looking at an extended version of the circular flow diagram, where we are going to say that in addition to these factor markets and product markets, there can be a third market, which we can call financial market, where you really do not buy and sell any physical good or raw materials, but you buy and trade financial resources. That's a far-fetched idea. We don't want to go there, but we can literally put the word bank there, right? Right? Why? Because bank is where you're going to save. Bank is where also firm can borrow. If you need capital, you don't really need to go to the household to buy that, borrow that. You can go to a bank and ask for a loan, right? Banks are extremely important. And they are missing in the original form, in the original structure of the circular flow diagram. So banks were missing. We have just, filled out one of the missing link. Another missing link is important. Something else is missing in our circular flow diagram. What is that? What else do you see in your actual economy that we are not seeing here? Who said that? That's a very good answer, by the way. I want to sort of extend that idea, because taxes are not the only thing that are missing here. What we are missing here is the government. But it is directly connected with your statement, right? So the reason why this is a good one is because we can go back to the original question and ask, what else is our household doing that is not reflected here? In addition to spending money, in addition to saving for their future, our household also pays taxes to the government. So tax is kind of missing, right? As it turns out that the household is not the only participant that pays tax. Our firm also pays tax. And yes.
How would you categorize investments?
In an economics course, and in economics, investment is the expenditure made by firms on stuff that they need to produce. So investment would be a firm buying a capital. It is very different from the way we look at investment in finance, right? So investment will be these payments or part of these payments that are going to the factor market, not all of them, because when you pay for labor, it's not investment. Why? Because investment is about when firms are making expenditures for their future production. So you're thinking about expanding production tomorrow, you buy a machine today, and that's your investment. If you are paying for labor, you are trying to pay for your immediate production, and that's not investment. Right? So the definition of investment is at the heart of a macroeconomics course, and I hope that you take that course because it's a very important macroeconomic concept. Now, I will formally put government inside our circular flow diagram, and I'm going to argue that not having government in this circular flow diagram makes this model almost meaningless. Because in order to really have a good understanding about the economy, we really need to understand about the government. Why? Because government is everywhere. Our household pays taxes to the government. Our firm pay taxes to the government. Our government can buy stuff from the product market just like the consumer or households. Our government can make payment to firms, households, like a transfer payments, like unemployment benefit payment, like Medicare. Our government can make payments to the firm like paying subsidy. Government is everywhere in this circular flow diagram. So without having government, this model is incomplete. But that's fine. For a principles of microeconomics course, the most critical element or critical reason why we are spending time on this circular flow diagram is that we want to understand the relationship between two markets and two participants, households and firms, product market and factor market. With that, I'm going to conclude my discussion about the circular flow diagram and move to the next topic. But before that, does anyone have any question? Okay, that was pretty quick. What we're going to do now is we are going to look at the next component of this very lengthy and exciting chapter. We are now going to spend some time looking at the role of market again, but not any kind of market, but the role of free market and what it can offer us. Part of the reason why we talk about free market in our principles of microeconomics course is mainly because of the historical lineage of this idea and not really to address realistic ideas or realistic views. Free market in modern day does not exist, but it is an essential component of the thought process or the philosophical structure that gave rise to economics. Free market, theoretically, is a market where there is no restriction of what you can buy and what you can sell, or the quantity of what you buy and the price that you are willing to pay for, or the quantity that you are willing to sell and the price that you are willing to charge. There is no restriction on any of them. In modern day version, the free market is a market where there is no government intervention. Now, when you define a free market as the way I have done, you see clearly that free market really do not exist. But I can assure you that the idea behind free market is appealing as much as it is today as it was 200 years ago when the idea of free market first came about. And it was used by probably the first economist in the history. His name is Adam Smith. He was a British economist. He was the finance minister of England around 1770. He was also the financial advisor to the Queen. In 1776, Adam Smith wrote a book called Wealth of Nations, and that is considered the first ever formal, textbook in economics, or any literature that focused on the economics aspect of our market. Before we move any further, we would like to point out one more thing, that although the idea of a free market is a theoretical one, meaning that in reality free markets really do not exist, from the empirical perspective we have noticed something fascinating. We have noticed that most of the developed countries in the world have been able to sort of develop markets which are very close to a free market, but not entirely the same thing. So most of the developed countries that we study in our economics have markets where there is a lot of flexibility. Now this particular empirical observation has confused a lot of people, a lot of researchers, who thinks that in order to achieve economic growth, in order to achieve a higher living standard, a country desperately needs to establish free markets. That idea is not wrong, is not right. There are countries in the world where markets are not free at all, but they are enjoying very high standard of living. And these are the countries that you rarely pay attention to. These are not countries like China or India. These are countries like Sweden and Finland, where markets are highly regulated. So there is a lot of realistic and unrealistic debate about the role of a free market. We are going to slowly unravel them because it's an important debate. But we're going to start with Adam Smith, because Adam Smith was probably the first generation of people who were really fascinated about the market. Now, you have to understand that the idea of a market was very different back in 1776 than it is today. Now, Adam Smith, being a student of economics, was fascinated with the market. He realized that a market is an exciting place, right? A market is a place where a buyer goes to buy his things. A market is a place where the seller goes to sell his things. So the question is, how does a buyer know that if he goes to this place, he will be able to buy that good? Or how does a seller know that if he goes to that place called market, he will be able to sell his product? Do we all see the point? In 1776, this was an interesting point, right? Over time, we have learned the various reasons why people come to a marketplace. But back then, when Adam Smith was writing about this market, he used a term which confused people for about 300 years. He used a word called invisible hand. And before talking about the actual interpretation of the invisible hand, I want to go back to the history behind this word a little bit. So when he wrote his book and talked constantly about the role of invisible hand and how it created the market, people obviously were thinking about something else. What do you think they were thinking when they were reading the word invisible hand in this book? Well, yeah, obviously. Doesn't exist means that probably you cannot see something that is invisible. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. What do you think? God. Right. So for a long time, people had this, major misperception about what Adam Smith was talking about when he was talking about, invisible hand. Now notice that this is a major shift, right? So in 1776, you're talking about Europe, which was very religious. Everything was observed and analyzed from the lens of religion. You all know that, right? You have heard numerous stories about how religion played such an important role of the European development. Now, after a couple of 100 years ago, when people seriously started looking at in this word invisible hand, they realized that Adam Smith was talking about something completely different but equally interesting concept. And Adam Smith was talking about something called rational self-interest. Okay? One word which we already have defined, rationality means when you are making systematic decisions. Self-interest is a new word, and we want to explore that idea. According to Adam Smith, the invisible hand is not some unforeseen or invisible force. Invisible hand is this idea of self-interest, where all of us are selfish and trying to satisfy our own self-interest. A buyer wants to buy things, a seller wants to sell things. So a buyer knows that he has to go somewhere to buy the goods that he wants to buy. So he communicates with the seller and they agree to meet at a certain place. The seller, on the other hand, wants to sell his product, so he coordinates with the buyer and meets in a place where he sells his product, and that is how a market came about. So market or self-interest in a market is the invisible hand that is bringing the buyer and the seller together. And this is, I would argue, is a fascinating way of looking at the market. There are pitfalls of this observation as well. If you read the actual text and appreciate the power of the market and appreciate the role of the invisible hand, which brings the buyer and the seller, creates the market and solves almost all the economic problems, or allow you to buy everything that you want to buy, you might think that a market is the answer to all your life's problems. That takes us now to the last element of this chapter, where we are going to start with this very critical question, and we are going to go slowly over this one. The question is, can market solve all our economic problems? This is a general question, and I am not interested in that question. The question that I am interested in, which is observationally equivalent to this question, is that, is there a role of government in our economy? They are observationally equivalent, by the way. I'm going to explain why that is. So the question that I am interested in is that, does the government play any important role in the economy? Now, to you, this answer is trivial, right? The answer to this question is trivial. If you think about the question for 1 minute, your answer would be unambiguously yes. Yes, there is a role of the government in the economy, because you were raised in an economy where government has always been playing an active role. Are we all clear on this? But it might surprise you, or it might not, I don't know, that there is still an unrealistic belief that markets can be free, markets can be unregulated, and that's like a good idea. Let us first explore the fact that a free market is not a good idea. Why? Why is a free market not a good idea?
Because we put the government at the center of our economy.
No. So when we talk about a free market, we are asking the question, is it okay for government not to regulate the market? Is it okay for the government not to intervene in a market? Will we be okay if the market is unregulated? What do you think? I'm a bit surprised that you guys are taking that long.
Don't you need the government to set rules because not everybody can be trusted?
I like that word. I like that word very much. The word rules. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Yes. Why? I mean, can the market not alleviate the problem of scarcity? Let's try to analyze your point. Your point is very critical. So one could argue that, hey, market is a good mechanism. If something is scarce, market should be able to solve the scarcity problem. If something is scarce, you pay a high price for that, right? Does that solve your scarcity problem? I want to start talking about the role of government by pointing out one critical issue, which I might forget, is that a major part of the discussion of why the government should be present in our economy stems from the normative side of the economics debate, not from the positive side. Because when you look at the economics from a positive lens, we can argue that the economy can probably live without a government. But we know that that's not the case. Government is always there. So after we convince ourselves that this is the truth, government is always there to stay, let us now look at the things that government can do for us. Okay? I forgot that before I move on, I apologize. I'm skipping this particular slide, which is kind of exciting because it talks about how people's self-interest can bring them together. With the last 2 minutes, I'm going to entirely focus on what the government can do in an economy. I again apologize. I missed this point, which I think is important. So I have 3 minutes. Please stay with me on that. In the first minute, I'm going to explain this role of this word entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is something who brings stuff to the market, brings ideas. Examples that we are given here is Ford. You all know why he is an entrepreneur and the importance of Ford. But I want to always talk about toilet paper. Because I think that toilet paper is as groundbreaking as Ford coming up with the first sedan. Why? Because 30 years ago, there was no such thing as a toilet paper. Now toilet paper is an essential part of your life. So the way it became part of your life is because somebody thought about this, produced that good, took that risk, sold it in the marketplace, and now it's a $1 trillion industry. Are we all clear on that? So the role of an entrepreneur cannot be simplified or oversimplified. So please take a look at that. I want to now quickly move on to the 2 critical roles that the government plays in any economy. The first one is the protection of private property. What does that mean? It means that when you buy a property, you are allowed to own that property, keep that property to yourself. You could be a farm, you could own a piece of land, you could be a household, you could own a car. Now, when we say that it's the role of the government to ensure this private property right, we are not overemphasizing. For most of you, your private property is like a natural right to your existence, right? But then there are countries where if you park your car in front of your house at night, in the morning you might see that the car is gone. And you can never find that, right? So it's the role of the government to ensure that whatever property you have, whatever assets you have, you can retain ownership of that. Are we all clear on that? I want to conclude my class today by talking about the word that he mentioned, rules. Rules are important. Because there are some rules that only the government can execute, and they are mainly enforcement of property rights. And government can set rules for that. An example is a rent contract, right? You write a contract with your landlord. The government ensures that both you and your landlord adheres to the rules because nobody else will ensure that. Thank you very much. That concludes our discussion today.